Hi, I'm Justin, and welcome to Behind the Score, where we explore how compositions of music have been used for resistance, rebellion, and revolution. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Irish rebel songs. Now, there's a lot to talk about. Definitely more than I can fit in one episode. So, this will likely be split up into a few parts, right? A series, right? Many episodes. Now, in today's episode, we're first going to focus on Irish independence history, and then we will look specifically at the Rebellion of 1798, and go over rebel songs on actually both sides of the rebellion, so both the Irish side and the British. Now, I would love to talk a lot more, right, about examples of rebel songs. But it is very important that we understand the history of Irish independence first, right, so we sort of get the general sentiment at the time. So now let's move on to history. And our story begins in 1169. And that's like a very long time ago. Now, like a lot of things in history, it was the British. Right? It was called the Anglo Norman invasion, where eventually English kings claimed sovereignty over their next door neighbor, Ireland. Now, to quote the professor of medieval Irish and insular history at Trinity College Dublin, Sean Duffy, within 2 years of the arrival of this small group of Anglo Norman adventurers, Henry II would become the first reigning English monarch to set foot on Irish soil. In what was arguably the single most formative event in Irish history, King Henry formally brought the island under the lordship of the English crown, a constitutional relationship that endures to the present day in the case of Northern Ireland. It is no exaggeration to say that the central dynamic of Irish history and Ireland's complicated connection with England over the course of the last 8.5 centuries originates in the 1169 invasion. This was also a significant moment in world history, the beginning of European expansion and colonization, which eventually spread across the world. And now back to me. Indeed, I agree. It would definitely spread across the world. Now, this all really started to develop, actually, into more suppression of the Irish people in the 16th and 17th centuries. And a part of this was due to the implementation of so called plantations. Basically, the British confiscated a lot of land from Irish landowners, particularly in Ulster, which is located in Northern Ireland. Now, a key reason was due to the Protestant Reformation, where Christianity split into two, with Protestants, who were mainly the British, and the Catholics, who were mainly the Irish. And a reason why the Protestants in English did not exactly like the Catholics was because they thought they were more loyal to the Pope than to the British crown. Now, ceding this land, right, the British goal was to convert the people, and this was achieved through something called penal laws, where they restricted the rights of Catholics in Ireland. So, when they were passed, the Catholics could not own land, hold public office, or receive an education. Now, of course, the Irish never exactly liked the penal laws. They didn't exactly embrace the Protestants either, and this was because they were very different from the British. To quote historian Dr. Roger Van Zwamberg, Ireland has always been deeply foreign to the British, despite her geographical closeness to the mainland of Britain. Historically, Ireland has been Gaelic. Her language, culture, religion, and economy could not have been more different when compared to the English. Now, of course, with dislike of laws, some took to writing. Right? A historian in history, Sean Henry Parnell, wrote in A History of the Penal Laws Against the Irish Catholics in 1825, whereas various acts of parliament have been passed, imposing on His Majesty's subjects, professing the popish of a Roman Catholic religion, many restraints and disabilities to which other subjects of this realm are not liable, and from the peaceable and loyal demeanor of His Majesty's popish or Roman Catholic subjects, it is fit that such restraint and disabilities shall be discontinued. Now, at the same time, right, there were plenty of rebellions happening as well. Now, again, right, in today's episode, we are really focusing in on the rebellion of 1798. Right, but there were rebellions before this. Part of the reason why we are focusing on the rebellion of 1798 specifically is recency and accuracy, right? Because it's more recent, we have more to work with, and over time, especially some of the older rebellions, lots of details get lost, especially music compositions. Now, I'd like to still point out that there were rebellions. To just name a few, here is a short list. The 9 Years' War from 1594 to 1603, the Rebellion of 1641, which happened in 1641, and the Williamite War from 1689 to 1691. Now, let's focus in on the history of the Rebellion of 1798 itself. For context, right, by the 1790s, the penal laws were actually a lot more relaxed. At the same time, though, there were still issues for the Irish living in Ireland. They had compulsory tithes, basically forced taxes, to support the Anglican Church of Ireland, even for non-Anglicans. Now, on the positive, they had their own parliament in Dublin. Hooray! Except it was mostly controlled by the British. And lastly, looking at world events at the time, the American and French Revolution had just happened. The American Revolution happening from 1775 to 1783, and the French Revolution from 1789 to 1794. Now, these revolutions were driven by Enlightenment ideas, and many people in Ireland felt they also needed to revolt against their oppressors. Now, the revolution itself started with the Society of United Irishmen. The organization was originally founded in Belfast in 1791 by a group of liberal-minded Presbyterians. Their leader was a person called Theobald Wolfe Tone, a lawyer in Dublin. Now, their original goal was to just reform. Right? Their goal was to, quote, to unite Protestant, Catholic, and dissenter under the common name of Irishmen, and to reform the Parliament. Now, in 1793, they were forced to go underground after the British decided to outlaw them. But this also radicalized them. So instead of just wanting to create peace among everyone, they now wanted a complete break with Britain and the establishment of an independent Irish Republic. And they hoped for military aid from France as well, much like the Americans. Now, they also created an alliance with a militant underground Catholic group called the Defenders. They had men and allowed for armed insurrection and a wider national reach. But this also contradicted the original goal of not having any religious violence. Now, the rebellion itself failed. It was scheduled for May 23rd, 1798, and the signal would be the stopping of all mail coaches out of Dublin. Unfortunately for the Irish, authorities caught wind of the plan on the eve of the rebellion and arrested a lot of senior officials. So most of the rebellion was localized. There were some successes here and there, but overall, it was crushed before it even started. Now, the Society of United Irishmen had wanted an alliance with France, as mentioned earlier. They got an alliance, but it kind of came too late. A small French expeditionary force landed in August of 1798. Now, if you remember their leader, Theobald Wolfe Tone, he also had a final attempt with the French. Right, but before they even landed, they were captured at sea by the British Navy, and Theobald Wolfe Tone committed suicide inside of a prison. Now, we have to look at the aftermath of the rebellion as well. It included the following. It led to increased sectarianism, particularly between Catholics and Protestants. It also led to the Act of the Union, which came into effect in 1801, which abolished the Irish Parliament and made it so that Ireland was instead represented at the Parliament in London. Okay, so now that we have a general grasp of the history itself, let's take a look at the rebel songs at the time. So first, even just looking at the Irish Rebellion of 1798, there are a lot of songs to look at, which means there are definitely songs I'm not going to talk about in this podcast. So if any of this sounds interesting, definitely read more about them. Because again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, my second point is that there are plenty of songs made about the Irish Rebellion of 1798, and also a lot that were used to rebel. But some were composed many decades after the rebellion of 1798 actually happened. Still, right, keep in mind that Ireland did not gain independence until 1922. So, right, there are still rebel songs used to fight back against the British when Ireland was still not independent. Throughout the 1800s, there were still multiple movements against British rule, such as Daniel O'Connell's Repeal Association, the Young Irelanders, and the Home Rule movement. So today, right, we'll delve into rebel songs about the Irish Rebellion of 1798 that were composed at the time the rebellion happened. Right, so they had an effect on the rebellion itself. Right, maybe in a future episode, we'll look at rebel songs about the rebellion of 1798 that were made after the event. Now onto the rebel songs themselves. In general, they were mostly ballads. Right? Many such ballads circulated orally or on broadsides before formal publication. Now, for a definition, a ballad in traditional folk music is a narrative song that tells a story. Right? Originally, right, they were mostly for the wealthy, but as print became cheaper, they were spread by printing the lyrics and put on one side of a piece of paper. Now, these lyrics on a side of paper were called broadsides or song sheets. They were often sold by street vendors at cheap prices. Now, typically, they didn't actually have any musical notation on them, right? They just had the lyrics. Occasionally, they would also have the name of the tune printed to the side, and you just assume the reader knows the tune. Now, what if you don't know the tune? Well, lucky for you, a lot of the vendors themselves would often actually be singers. So, and they would demonstrate the proper tune to the buyer. Now, what if, the vendor doesn't know, or if you're super creative, right? Occasionally, the buyer themselves would actually just, simply make up a tune for the lyrics. Now, for this episode's main Irish rebel song, we'll be looking at the Croppy Boy. Now, during the time of the rebellion, it was sung and passed around as broadsides or song sheets. It's a ballad, and as such, it tells a story. A quite tragic story, actually. Basically, it follows a young croppy. Now, at the time, croppy referred to the Irish revolutionaries. It was a term for the rebels, referring to their short haircuts, which took inspiration from the French Revolution. Now, the young croppy goes to a church and meets a shrouded priest sitting in a chair for confession right before he goes to battle. But he then finds out that the priest was actually a loyalist yeoman. Yeomen were people who lived in Ireland, but were loyal to the British crown. Of course, the priest or yeoman betrays the boy. And the croppy boy is set to an old Irish air called Colin Og Astar, which is about 500 years old. This air is also quite popular, also being the music of another folk song called Lady Franklin's Lament. Now, I'll read the first 4 lines of the ballad. Good men and true in this house who dwell, to a stranger, Boichel, I pray you tell, is the priest at home, or may he be seen? I would speak a word with Father Green. Now, looking at the ballad, being a rebel song along with the other songs at the time, they played a pivotal role in affecting the rebellion. First, the croppy boy became a martyr for Irish freedom. His sacrifice is noble and inspiring. Now, the story of martyrdom is very powerful across a lot of resistance movements, encouraging and inspiring others to remember the cause and perhaps even take up the fight themselves in the future. Be it the near future or even further away, which, again, we might cover in a future episode. But the truth is, throughout history, martyrs are important in so many movements. I mean, all of the following figures, Emmett Till, John Brown, Malcolm X, MLK, are all examples of martyrs who played a pivotal role in movements. Now, the second way it played an important role in the rebellion was by humanizing the rebellion. But other than the fact that the story itself is sad and paints a poor picture of the British, it made the rebels seem human. And this was especially important when considering the other side, right, the British. Which brings me to my second example of songs used by the British. Now, today, for the British side, we'll be looking at the song Croppies Lie Down. Now, while the Irish rebel songs were used to fight back against the British also used music to their own advantage. Now, I'll read the first part of the ballad, Croppies Lie Down, but only the first 2 lines. "Oh, croppies, you'd better be quiet and still. Ye shan't have your liberty, do as you will." Now, with this, I'd also like to point out the spontaneous nature of these ballads, right, where they were passed around orally and people added their own variation to it. Right, the music of this ballad can actually be sung in 2 keys. Right, while most versions of Croppies Lie Down are in G major, you may come across a version in C major. Right, however, across the board, it is in 6/8 time. As you would probably expect, the song depicts the Catholic rebels as cowardly traitors and mocks them for losing against the brave loyalists. Now, this shows, right, that music was used by both sides for each of their own causes. Music in rebellion, be it to fight back or to keep control, it's pivotal in so many movements. Now, of course, there is a lot more to the Irish rebel songs, even some that were composed after the rebellion of 1798 that were also important to future rebellions. So, we will definitely take a closer look in future episodes. Anyways, that's all for today's episode. If you found any part of this podcast interesting, share it with a friend. Thank you for tuning in to Behind the Score, and I hope to see you again in our next episode.